1 year ago today, on August 6th of 2023, the Penguins acquired Erik Karlsson, Rem Pitlick, and Dylan Hamaliuk in exchange for Mikael Granlund, Jan Ruda, a 2024 first-round pick that was eventually used to be traded up for the Sharks to get Sam Dickinson in this year's draft. They also sent Casey DeSmith, Jeff Petrie, a 2025 second-rounder, and prospect Nathan Legare to the Montreal Canadiens. So 1 year ago today, if you look back on it, what are your thoughts on the Erik Karlsson trade after one calendar year?
After 1 year, I'm still looking at it as a pretty solid deal for the Penguins. I mean, they dumped a lot of things off. A lot of what people would say were Ron Hextall masterclasses to pick up the future Hall of Fame defenseman. On the surface, that's a good start. I understand that Erik Karlsson may not have had the ideal season. I get that expectations were, depending on who you ask, maybe a little overstated, but he didn't meet any of the minimum expectations, at least for the start of the season. As things got rolling near the end, whenever the team was really picking things up, he himself did as well. But at the end of the day, looking back at a year, you wish it had been better, but I think there's room for improvement. He's an awesome guy. He's an awesome character to have in the locker room, too. He's obviously one of the best talents in the world at his position, and just needs another chance to prove that in a new uniform. The personality isn't going to go anywhere. He's one of the best guys in the room to deal with. He's one of the best guys in the room, period. And once things start translating on the ice into a bit of a better degree, it's going to end up looking like a Kyle Dubas masterclass in no time.
Yeah, obviously missing the postseason right after doing that, giving away a first-round pick, and then essentially making moves to say you're rebuilding, it's gonna make it look a little worse looking back on it at this point, because right now we're talking about the rebuild or the bagel, whatever you want to call it, and the Penguins could have probably used a lottery pick this past year, that 14th overall selection, which eventually became the 11th overall selection for the San Jose Sharks. But at the same time, you look at what Karlsson was at the end of the year. If he was that for maybe 10% more of the season, the Penguins are probably a playoff team last year. Because at the end of the year, Erik Karlsson was, as anticipated, as expected, very good for the Penguins. And I know some people will highlight some of the mistakes that he made down the stretch. It's Erik Karlsson. And if you're, expecting that to go away, then you just don't understand how he plays, and you just haven't been paying attention for his entire career. He's going to make those mistakes, but he was at his best down the stretch. And I think the fact that it took longer than anticipated for him to adjust and get to that moment is the most disappointing part. Maybe not the points total. He finished with 56. You would have hoped that he had more, and we'll talk about expectations for next year. But I think the one thing that was most disappointing is how long it took him to adjust to being in Pittsburgh, to playing with, I guess part of that is playing with Pettersson, but also playing with Graves, but also being moved around a lot. I think those are the biggest disappointments in year one for Erik Karlsson. But still, 1 year later, you look back at the trade, and knowing where they were at the time, it's a solid deal for Kyle Dubas, even if it didn't pan out in the first season.
Yeah, that's why it's a multi-year thing to look at. I don't know how else to put it. You have a couple years with this future Hall of Famer to really see what he can do, and just know the expectations are going to be higher. You now have a new baseline almost to grow from. He came in with off of a 101 point season. Just from that, the expectations are going to be a little elevated. They're going to be a bit outrageous, considering it was a historic season. But I forget what we had placed it at when he arrived, but it certainly wasn't 56. But now, another year older with some higher expectations, some higher hopes for him at least, maybe not as the whole team. You're thinking 56 to 60 should be the baseline almost, and going from there, especially if he's playing with Marcus Pettersson all season and not getting, he was pretty steady with Pettersson, but with the rest of the defense getting hit with the shuffle button pretty often, it shook things up quite a bit. So if he's able to have a consistent winger or a consistent line mate with him, like Marcus Pettersson, there should be some good chemistry going on with Erik Karlsson, who should see improvement in year two in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, on top of that, it's just a second year playing with Marcus Pettersson, not just playing with Pettersson more in total, but the fact that they played together a lot of last year. They also played over in the World Championships for Team Sweden. That was a dominant Team Sweden up until the knockout stages. So I'm excited. This kind of dips into the expectations for year 2 that we were going to get to. When you look at his point total, which I think is what a lot of people are going to judge him based on, at least the majority of the fan base is going to judge him based on point production. Last year with that 56 was disappointing. But if you look at his career points per game average, it's 0.815. I think that's around where he finishes again this year, especially if he stays healthy. I could see him between 65 and 70 points, and that's where my expectations are. Last year, it was between 75 and 80. I was saying maybe he can get close to being a point per game player again. This year, another year older, based on the team that's around him and the fact that they have a lot of heavy lifting to do on the power play to get that back to a respectable number, I'm going to put it between 65 and 70. I think that would be a tremendous year for Erik Karlsson in 2024-25, and I think the Penguins would be in pretty good position if they get that out of him.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly where I would have put it as well. Just right in that sort of vicinity of points, and maybe even if, let's say, it's unlikely. Let's say he finds a nice step defensively too, which I think in the early goings of the season, I think everyone sort of thought he was going to have, and then that filtered away pretty quickly. So it's going to be about offense. It's going to be about scoring points, and then maybe quarterbacking one of the power play units.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll see what type of impact having David Quinn back is going to have on him, because you look at David Quinn, he has a proven track record with several top defensemen. I mean, obviously, specifically with Erik Karlsson in that season that you referenced in 2022-23 when he won the Norris Trophy, when he scored the most points in 30 years by a defenseman. But he also was there for the early years, David Quinn was, at least in New York, of Adam Fox. So you're hoping for him to come in and kind of pick up where he left off with Karlsson, and also aid Chris Letang in that aspect as well. I mean, Quinn is going to be in charge of the defense. He's going to be in charge of revitalizing this power play. So a lot of what Erik Karlsson's season is going to be up to how well he and David Quinn can really come in, get back on the right foot right away, and kind of disperse that throughout the blue line.
Sorry, I wasn't ready for you, but yeah, that's going to be the pretty essential, starting point for Erik Karlsson this upcoming season.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say about Karlsson, because we've talked about his point total, we've talked about what was disappointing about last year. The power play is going to be massive this year for the Penguins. If it's good, last year they're in the playoffs. It was historically bad, and they missed the playoffs by 3 points in the last week of the season. The question I have for you is, do you see Erik Karlsson doing the thing that we wanted him to do all year last year? Do you think he takes charge now that he's had his feet underneath him, that he's played with guys like Crosby and Malkin for a full season? Do you think that will give him the opportunity, especially with the confidence of having David Quinn behind him now, to be able to say, hey, I am the guy on this power play. Those guys are Hall of Famers. Those guys are great, but this is my power play unit to run, because I think that's what they need to have happen for them to find some success. You're muted also, by the way. I think you double tapped.
I missed the button. Oh, I'm having a great day. Yeah, I do think this absolutely can be that year for him to take over. It might take a conversation with Chris Letang as well to take a bit of a step back, but I mean, act like that conversation didn't start last season.
Yeah.
He played every game, if I'm not mistaken. But it's still something that needs to be addressed in general. Just, hey, this is the point of everyone's career right now. Chris Letang's a year older. Sid and Gino are each a year older. Yeah, Erik Karlsson's a year older too, but he is A, younger, and B, proving to still have the legs that Chris Letang just might not. I get that Chris Letang was dealing with a myriad of injuries last season, but none of them seem to require any significant surgery. So who knows what that means going into next season with him health-wise. That's something to keep an eye on, to watch out for and see if he has any sort of decline. And then just moving forward, quite honestly, just looking into what Karlsson can do on his own and taking over as a number one defenseman.
Yeah, it's going to be one of the biggest storylines for everybody to watch throughout this season. Obviously, everybody knows where they stand going into the year. I would put Erik Karlsson as your number one defenseman. I think deployment, it's going to be pretty equal, with Karlsson taking the majority of power play time and Chris Letang probably taking a good bit of the penalty kill time.